Hi, my name is Chrissy Valentine, and I'm doing Module 12 about Internet safety. So the first question it asks is, how is Internet safety important to me as a role as an educator, and how can I teach this in my future classroom? So for me as a future educator, I think Internet safety is extremely important. Technology and the Internet are becoming so increasingly utilized within our schools, with our children, educator to student relationships. So making sure children and students are able to appropriately utilize these instruments is probably one of the most important things to teach them when, giving them an iPad for themselves. I don't think we as teachers should be giving out iPads until we know the students are knowledgeable about appropriate usage and all different aspects of internet safety and risks or scenarios that they could potentially get in and how to deal with them. So for me, I am really big on cyberbullying. I think that it's really scary for children. We've seen very scary, detrimental things happen because of cyberbullying. I know sexual predators are huge, and also something really scary. I know that a lot of websites are easily accessible, depending on what type of, if you're using your home internet, you might have access to anything. I think luckily schools are beginning to block most websites that may have any inappropriate types of information or anything like that. So I think that's good for schools to be doing. But just because there's so much that can be accessed through the internet, and you kind of are behind this screen as a student, and it kind of gives students a power that they wouldn't have in real life. It actually gives not just students, anyone, a power that they might not have in real life. We know on YouTube there's so many comments, hate comments, and it's so much anonymous things that these people who, if they weren't behind something that was anonymous, wouldn't be doing. So I think students are beginning to realize that they have this power, and sometimes they're taking advantage of it, abusing the internet in ways that are just not okay. So I think for me as a future teacher, I think before giving students any type of internet activity or internet access, making sure I sit them down and talk to them about the risk factors and things that can happen through internet safety, and teaching them the ways to be appropriate and laying down some guidelines. I think that would be the best bet when worrying about internet safety as an educator. So teaching it in a classroom, I think, using some of the features you have through the module would be awesome. I know that there was the Connect Safely, which, had a lot of great ideas and advice in how to teach your students, or what to teach your students when talking about internet safety. I know the librarian at my school had a great lesson. So, I work at a school now, so I think I've gained a lot of insight onto how to go about teaching internet safety just through listening to some of the teachers that I work with in general. I think there's plenty of ways that it can be taught, and just focusing on, the more important aspects, and just making sure guidelines are set, especially when using it in the classroom, because, I don't want my name to be at risk either as a teacher or an educator for not setting these guidelines or regulations on internet access, and then a student is, talking to a peer inappropriately, or a student is looking at something online that they shouldn't be looking at. That kind of goes on me as an educator, when if I would have just taking the time to teach a little bit about the appropriateness of the internet, that might have all been prevented. So number 2 said, what are your thoughts on exploring the NetSmart website and completing the Teaching Digital Citizen training program, and do you think it's relevant and used for all educators. So I definitely thought the NetSmart website was very convenient when talking about internet safety and teaching it as an educator. I think there were some really great, it touched on, every point that needs to be talked about when working with internet safety and educating children on internet safety. I think that, it talked about cyberbullying and, it talked about online sexual solicitation, privacy, sexting, it touched on all those aspects that, we see children getting into every day, all these scenarios that become so increasingly dangerous even for students. And it gives great ways on how to teach and educate our students to make appropriate decisions. Now for me, since I kind of grew up in this online world, it was the majority of my high school and everything, I have experienced all of this firsthand, so a lot of it was common sense to me. So I think as an educator who has kind of surrounded themselves with internet and knows the behind the scenes of what goes on with students and knows how cyberbullying works and just things like that, I don't think I necessarily needed to do the training. Like I said, there was definitely some things I got out of it, definitely some things that would be very helpful when it comes to educating my students, but not necessary per se. But I do think for educators who may not be completely involved in the internet world and don't know much about some of the risks of the internet and haven't really experienced, high-risk situations, I think this might be really good for them because it helps them use some keywords and come up with some advice on how students might be able to deal with, any of these types of things and things that they may have never thought about. And even me, I'm not saying that the website didn't give me any information, because it definitely did. So I think it's a great website and definitely something that educators everywhere can utilize. I just don't think the training is necessary for all educators. Number 3, talked about the article and what I took away from it. So the article touched on, the main points of internet safety and kind of the issues regarding appropriate usage of the internet. So it talked about cyberbullying. Again, it talked about sexual predators, sexual solicitation, accessing sexual or inappropriate websites, and all these different types of things, and talked about some of the risk factors. So like with cyberbullying, I know it talked about sometimes, like I said earlier, like being anonymous can give people a power. It talked about how people seek revenge by cyberbullying. Like, again, it gives you more power that you wouldn't have in real life. So cyberbullying is just easier for a lot of students to carry out, I suppose. But then, like with sexual solicitation and everything, they also found that a lot of students talked about how they could access sexual websites, inappropriate websites, and just like things that are not okay for students or children to be able to even know about, much less access. So I think a big thing that it talked about in the article was the disconnect between, students and children and parents and educators. We just have to realize that we are that preventative measure for children when it comes to these inappropriate sides and aspects of the internet. If we are able to sit down with our students or our children and talk to them about some of the scenarios or situations that they could potentially get into and the consequences and risk factors and just any type of negative influence that can come from the internet, and teach them ways to, prevent from getting into those situations, I think that we will be in a much better place as a society, because just giving these children so much power and access to so much of the inappropriateness on the internet is not okay, and even some of the things that we can access as adults maybe shouldn't be okay. So just telling them, if someone's cyberbullying you, block them, make a new username, tell an adult. If someone's trying to solicit you sexually, do the same thing. Block them, tell an adult. Don't accept. I think there was plenty of things that the article listed about how to maybe go about these things, and as well as the other sites from the module. But I definitely think that teaching and educating students about internet safety is extremely important, especially in a growing society using technology. So this module was definitely helpful, and I will utilize a lot of the information I learned and a lot of the information I've learned through my experiences in order to educate my students.